The lights of the Hollywood Bowl burned hot that August night in 1965, turning the open-air amphitheater into a roaring cauldron of 18,000 screaming souls. The Beatles had just torn through Twist and Shout, the final raw howl of John's voice still hanging in the humid air like smoke after a gunshot. Sweat plastered John's hair to his forehead, Paul's fingers ached from the bass strings, George's shoulders were tight from bending over his guitar. Ringo wiped his face with a towel, grinning despite the chaos. The set was winding toward its close, but the energy refused to die. Every chord still sparked fresh waves of hysteria from the crowd, girls standing on seats, boys climbing barriers, security guards red-faced and shouting useless orders into the din. Then the impossible happened. A shadow detached itself from the wings. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with that deliberate, coiled grace that had once made teenagers faint in theater aisles across America. No one in the band noticed at first, the spotlights were blinding, the noise deafening. But the screams changed. They didn't fade, they sharpened, fractured, became something new, 1,000 voices cracking at once in disbelief, ecstasy, terror. It was as if the entire bowl had inhaled sharply and forgotten to exhale. Paul froze mid-strum, the low E string vibrating against his fingertips. His eyes flicked left toward the side stage. George's head snapped up, fringe falling into his eyes. Ringo's sticks hovered an inch above the snare, frozen in midair. John turned last, slow, almost reluctant, like a man who senses the punchline before the joke lands. Elvis Presley stepped fully into the spotlight. He wore black leather pants that caught every gleam, a black shirt open at the collar revealing a glint of gold chain and tan skin slick with the night's heat. His hair was still impossibly high, sideburns sharp as knives. No entourage trailed him, no Colonel Parker barking orders, no Memphis Mafia forming a human shield. Just Elvis, alone, walking straight onto their stage like he owned it. Because once, he had. The crowd erupted into a wall of sound so violent it felt physical, a pressure wave that pushed against the band's chests. 18,000 voices collided, some shrieking his name in worship, some weeping outright, some simply screaming because the world had tilted off its axis. Girls in the front rows clutched each other, tears streaming, mouths open in silent howls. A boy near the back fainted and had to be passed hand over hand toward the medics. Security scrambled, radios crackling, but what could they do? This was Elvis. You didn't tackle Elvis. He stopped perhaps 10 feet from the microphones, hands loose at his sides, hips cocked just enough to remind everyone why they called him the pelvis in the first place. He surveyed the 4 young men who had unknowingly dethroned him on the charts, who had taken the crown he once wore so easily and turned it into something brighter, louder, more global. For one endless heartbeat, nothing moved except the pulse of the amplifiers and the collective gasp of the audience. Paul's bass hung loose from his shoulder. George actually laughed, a short, sharp, nervous bark that cut through the roar like a snapped string. Ringo's grin widened into something almost manic, eyes sparkling with the absurdity of it all. John stared hardest, blue eyes glittering with a cocktail of challenge, awe, and something darker, maybe jealousy, maybe recognition. They had idolized this man. They had covered his songs in Hamburg cellars when they were nobodies. And now here he was, stepping into their light. Elvis lifted one finger to his lips. The entire stadium hushed. Not gradually. Instantly. Like someone had thrown a switch on the world. The amplifiers still hummed, the night insects still chirped in the hills, but 18,000 human throats closed as one. Even the crickets seemed to pause. He leaned toward the nearest microphone. Paul's, actually, the one angled just so, and his voice rolled out low and velvet thick, the same voice that had once made mothers clutch their pearls and daughters clutch their hearts. Y'all mind if an old hillbilly joins you boys for one more? The words hung there, simple, almost shy. But they carried the weight of 10 years of rock and roll history. Paul's jaw dropped open. George laughed again, this time freer, almost relieved. Ringo let out a whoop that broke the spell just enough for scattered cheers to ripple through the front rows. John didn't smile. Not yet. He tilted his head, studying Elvis like a puzzle he hadn't expected to solve tonight. Elvis didn't wait for a formal yes. He reached for a spare guitar leaning against an amp, one of George's, a Gretsch that still bore the scars of 100 sweaty nights. He slung it over his shoulder with the same effortless motion he'd used 1,000 times before cameras, before crowds, before the army took him away and the movies softened his edges. Then he nodded at John. "Babies in Black," he asked softly, almost conversationally. "Heard you still play that one live. Always liked how it hurts." John's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smirk. He glanced at the others. Paul raised an eyebrow, George gave a tiny nod. Ringo twirled a stick and tapped the hi-hat once, crisp and ready. Silent agreement flashed between them like lightning across a summer sky. John counted them in, quiet, almost private, 1, 2, 3. The opening chords rang out, tentative at first, the way a conversation starts after too long apart. Paul's bass walked a mournful line. George's lead picked out the melancholy melody. Ringo kept it simple, brushing the snare like he was afraid to break the spell. Then Elvis stepped to the mic beside John, their shoulders almost touching, two voices from different worlds, different generations, suddenly sharing the same air. When the chorus hit, their harmonies locked. John's edgy, nasal bite wrapped around Elvis's deep, honeyed drawl. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was alive, raw, aching, beautiful in the way only unplanned things can be. Elvis leaned into the mic, eyes half closed, letting the words spill out like he'd been waiting years to say them with someone who understood the hurt behind them. John matched him note for note, pushing harder, daring him to push back. The crowd wept openly now, some girls swayed with arms raised as if in prayer. For those 3 minutes, time collapsed. The King and the Fab Four stood side by side under the same merciless lights, singing about a girl dressed in black who would never come back, and the whole world felt small enough to fit inside that single spotlight. The amplifiers thrummed with something more than electricity, history folding in on itself, past meeting present in a collision no one had scripted. Elvis added a small flourish on the guitar solo, a lick that echoed his old Sun Records days but bent towards something newer, something Beatles-K. George watched, fascinated, then answered with a run of his own, respectful, not competitive. Paul's bass thumped deeper, anchoring them both. Ringo grinned behind the kit, keeping perfect time, eyes darting between the two legends like a kid who'd snuck into the best party ever. When the last chord faded, long, ringing, reluctant. The silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with what had just happened. Elvis turned to John first. No handshake. Just a long look, eye to eye, the kind men share when they recognize a shared wound. Then a single nod, slow, deliberate, carrying decades of unspoken history. Pride. Regret. Acknowledgement. He stepped back, gave the crowd one lazy salute, 2 fingers to the brow, the old showman's gesture, and walked off the stage the same way he'd come. Quiet, unhurried, hips rolling just enough to remind everyone he was still the king. The spotlight followed him until he disappeared into the wings. Then it snapped back to the Beatles. They stood there, instruments still in place, breathing hard. Paul looked at John. John looked at Paul. George wiped his face with his sleeve. Ringo set his sticks down carefully, as if they might shatter. No one spoke for what felt like forever. Then John lifted his head, voice hoarse from shouting over the crowd all night. "Well," he said, almost to himself. That happened. The crowd exploded again, not the frenzied screams of before, but something deeper, awe, gratitude, disbelief. They knew they had witnessed something that would be whispered about for generations, something history books would argue over because no cameras caught it, no tape rolled. Just memory, unreliable and sacred. Paul slung his bass higher on his shoulder and managed a shaky grin. Think we should finish the set, then? George chuckled. Might as well. Can't top that. Ringo picked up his sticks again. Bloody hell. I need a drink. John just stared into the wings where Elvis had vanished, a small, crooked smile tugging at his lips. They launched into I'm Down, rawer than ever, voices cracking with adrenaline and something like joy. But every man on that stage played differently now. Looser, bolder, as if a weight had lifted they hadn't known they carried. In the wings, Elvis leaned against a speaker case, arms crossed, listening. A roadie offered him a towel, he waved it away. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the old man watching the kids take over. He felt like part of it again. And somewhere in the Hollywood Hills, under a sky thick with stars, rock and roll shifted, just a fraction, just enough, so that nothing would ever feel quite the same again. The Hollywood Bowl still thrummed with residual electricity long after the last chord of I'm Down died away. The stage lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, but the crowd refused to leave. 18,000 people lingered in their seats or milled in the aisles, whispering, crying, hugging strangers as if to confirm what they just witnessed wasn't a mass hallucination. The air smelled of sweat, perfume, spilled soda, and something indefinably electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Backstage felt like a pressure cooker about to blow. The Beatles stumbled off stage in a daze, instruments handed to roadies without a word. John lit a cigarette with shaking hands, the flame flickering across his face. Paul kept rubbing his eyes as if trying to wipe away the afterimage of Elvis. George leaned against an amp stack, staring at the floor like it held answers. Ringo paced in small circles, muttering, bloody hell, every few steps like a mantra. No one had expected this. Not the invasion of their stage, not the harmony that had felt like fate, not the way the king had simply left. Like he dropped a bomb and walked away whistling. A production assistant rushed up, face flushed. Mr. Presley, he's still here. In the green room. Asking if you'd join him for a drink. John exhaled smoke in a long plume. Tell him we're coming. They filed into the small, wood-paneled room behind the stage. Couches sagging under years of celebrity weight, a table scattered with half-empty bottles, a record player spinning idly in the corner. Elvis sat in an armchair like a throne, legs crossed, a tumbler of something amber in his hand. No entourage tonight, just him, sleeves rolled up, collar still open. He looked smaller without the spotlight, more human, more tired. He rose when they entered, slow and courteous. Boys, he said, voice gravel soft. That was something. Paul managed the first words. We didn't know you were coming. Elvis chuckled, low and warm. Neither did I, till about an hour ago. Colonel's been on my case about meetin' you proper. Figured the bowl was as good a place as any. He gestured to the bottles. Help yourselves. Figure you earned it. Ringo went straight for the whiskey. George took a Coke. Paul hesitated, then poured a small scotch. John stayed standing, cigarette dangling. They sat. Awkward at first, the silence thick with everything unsaid. Elvis broke it. You know, I've been watchin' you fellas. From the sidelines. Saw the films, heard the records. Yesterday, that one's a killer. Cuts deep. Paul flushed. Coming from you, that's, thank you. Elvis waved it off. Don't thank me. Truth is truth. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. But I gotta ask, how'd you do it? Stay hungry like that? After all this? John answered before anyone else could. We didn't have a choice. Liverpool's cold. Hungry keeps you moving. Elvis nodded slowly. I remember that part. The hunger. Then the army took it, Hollywood smoothed it over. Left me, polished. He looked at his glass, swirling the ice. Tonight, though, on that stage with you, it felt like the old days. Raw. Real. George spoke up quietly. You didn't have to come out there. Could have watched from the wings. Could have, Elvis agreed. But I wanted to feel it again. The rush. The danger. He met John's eyes. You get that, don't you, John? The danger. John held the stare. Every damn night. A beat passed. Then Elvis smiled, that slow, knowing smile. Good. Don't ever lose it. World'll try to take it from you. Fight like hell. Ringo raised his glass. To not losing it. They clinked, 4 glasses against one. The sound rang small in the room, but it carried weight. Elvis set his drink down. One more thing. That harmony on Babies in Black. We locked in like we'd rehearsed for years. Felt like family, almost. Paul's voice was soft. It did. Elvis stood, stretching. I should let y'all get some rest. Big show tomorrow, right? Another bull night. George nodded. Yeah. Encore crowd, probably. Elvis paused at the door, hand on the knob. Listen. If you're ever back in Memphis, come by Graceland. No cameras, no press. Just music. Like tonight. John stubbed out his cigarette. We might take you up on that. Elvis looked at each of them, Paul's earnest eyes, George's quiet intensity, Ringo's easy grin, John's guarded fire. Y'all take care of each other. That's rarer than talent. He opened the door. The hallway noise rushed in, fans chanting outside the barriers, crew shouting orders. Elvis gave a small salute, same lazy 2-finger gesture he'd given the crowd. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut. For a long moment, no one moved. Paul finally spoke. Did that really just happen? John laughed, short, sharp, almost disbelieving. Twice in one night. First on stage, now here. Think we're cursed or blessed? George smiled faintly. Bit of both, maybe. Ringo drained his glass. I say blessed. And I say we bloody well better write about this someday. Even if no one believes us. They laughed then, real, exhausted, giddy laughter that echoed off the walls. Outside, the Hollywood night stretched on. Stars sharp above the hills, city lights glittering below like scattered sequins. The crowd was finally dispersing, voices carrying snippets of the miracle they'd seen. Elvis sang with them, harmony like angels. In the green room, 4 young men from Liverpool sat in silence again, letting the weight settle. They'd come to America as conquerors. Tonight, they'd been reminded there was still a king. And that sharing a throne, even for 3 minutes, felt more powerful than ruling alone. Paul lifted his glass one last time, to the empty chair where Elvis had sat. To the old hillbilly. They drank. And somewhere down the corridor, Elvis Presley walked toward his car, a small, private smile on his face, because for one night in 1965, the crown hadn't felt so heavy after all.